Theo Marshall was 32, a quiet and meticulous graduate student in New York City. He had the patience of a watchmaker and the curiosity of a child, traits that served him well in his work as a scholar of American literature. But Theo carried a subtle restlessness, a sense that life was passing him by while he wrestled endlessly with dusty books and archival materials. His current project was both personal and academic, researching his great-granduncle, Elias Marshall, a poet of the Harlem Renaissance, who had written a single book, torchlight verse, and then disappeared into obscurity. Theo's dissertation advisor had called it a lost cause, dismissing the poet as irrelevant. But for Theo, there was a connection beyond scholarship. There was lineage, history, and a quiet need to see the forgotten remembered. One gray afternoon, Theo found himself in the university's Columbia archive, a small reading room with tall windows that overlooked 121st Street. A radiator groaned beside him, rattling in protest against the cold, and his coffee sat beside him, slick and cooling. He had been staring at the same sentence for what felt like hours, the letters blurring together. He muttered them aloud, flat and sour on his tongue, but the words refused to settle. Then something impossible happened. The lights flickered, the radiator hissed, and the street outside seemed to melt away. When Theo opened his eyes, Harlem had changed. Cobblestones replaced asphalt, horse hooves clopped along the street, and the distant cry of a trumpet filled the air. A boy ran past carrying newspapers, and the smell of coal smoke hung heavy in the air. His phone was gone. Theo blinked, closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back in 2025. The coffee had spilled, his notes were ruined, and he told himself it was a stress-induced hallucination. But 2 weeks later, when he touched the fragile yellow cover of Torchlight verse again, the world shifted once more. This time, the transformation held. Outside the archive window, Harlem of the 1920s stretched into dusk, alive with voices and movement. And standing in front of him, as real as the floor beneath his feet, was Elias Marshall. Elias was a wiry man with a worn suit, mismatched socks, and ink stains on his fingers. His eyes were sharp, restless, full of a kind of energy that could unsettle a room. He slammed a folder onto the desk. "Jervis lied," he muttered. "He said he'd help. But all they want is another Langston, another Claude. I ain't the right color for them." Theo froze. He was meeting his great-granduncle, a man whose life had barely been documented. They spoke cautiously at first, Theo claiming to be a friend of Jervis, Elias wary and quick to judge. But soon, a tentative connection formed. They pored over the poems together, Elias reading aloud and Theo offering subtle guidance. "You over-explain the emotion," Theo said gently at one point. "People don't read between the lines," Elias shot back. "They do if the line hits right," Theo replied. Hours passed in a blur. Theo watched Elias write with fervor, witnessed the weight of grief and longing he had carried since childhood, and offered small nudges to strengthen a stanza or leave a line unresolved. When Theo suggested leaving a line about a mother's laugh unpolished, Elias hesitated, then nodded. At one quiet moment, Theo asked, almost in a whisper, if he could contribute a single line. Elias agreed. Theo wrote, "You cannot name the stars unless Yuvie walked beneath their heat." Elias stared at it, breath slow and deliberate. "That kind of line could make a man immortal," he said. "It's yours," Theo said softly. And just like that, the world shimmered, and Theo was back in the archive reading room. The radiator hissed, the inked pages lay open, and the poems were complete. The single line he had given had endured, entering literary history, quoted in anthologies and remembered by artists, while Elias himself remained nearly forgotten. Theo never told anyone what had happened. Not his advisor, not his friends, not even his mother. He incorporated what he could into his dissertation, honoring the voices of the unrecognized and lost,